like to get us started here. I want to welcome you all to an ITIF event on medical innovation. And I really can't think of anybody better to talk about that with us than Dr. Robert Epstein. So what we'll do today is Senator Klobuchar is running a little late as they just called the vote over in the Senate. So she's going to try to make it over here right after the vote. What we'll do is when Senator Klobuchar comes, we'll interrupt our conversation and turn it over to the Senator for some remarks from her, because she has been a real leader in medical innovation policy here in the Senate. So I want to start by introducing Dr. Epstein. I will then we'll engage in a little bit of a dialogue and give and take, and really, I think, delve down a little deeper into a lot of these critical questions. We'll adjourn at 1:30. We should have plenty of time for questions and comments from you all. So Dr. Epstein joined Medco in 1995 and has served as their chief medical officer since 1997. In this capacity, he's responsible for formulary development, clinical guidelines, drug information services, accreditation oversight, and personalized medicine guide services. I should actually explain, Medco is I think, the world's largest pharmacy benefit management company. And in that position, they're really almost uniquely suited to be able to understand what's going on in the country in terms of prescription drugs and how they can best be made to work. In 2009, Dr. Epstein was named the president of Medco Research Institute, where he oversees Medco's peer-reviewed research initiatives and collaborations in the areas of personalized medicine, comparative effectiveness, and chronic conditions. He has been trained as an epidemiologist. He's worked in public health and academia before joining the private sector. He's also past president of the International Society for Pharmacogenomics and Outcomes Research, and has served on the board of directors for the Drug Information Association. In 2008, he was nominated and elected to the federal CDC Evaluation of Genomic Applications in Practice and Prevention Commission, Stakeholder Committee, and also the AHRQ Centers for Education and Research on Therapeutics Committee. And he's published more than 50 peer-reviewed medical articles and book chapters, of which I have said I've read one.
I'll give you an autograph.
Thank you. That'd be very, very helpful. I'm sure many of you have read more of those, but so he really is, as I said, I think one of the leading experts here, particularly, we'll talk a little about partly how IT is enabling all this. So before I ask you, but I just want to maybe make a couple of framing remarks. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Past and Future of America's Economy, Long Waves of Innovation and Power Cycles of Growth. And I talked about that economies go through these big structural stages, sort of 40 to 50 years long. And a lot of other people write about this as well. But in the post-war economy after World War II, if you think about what was medical innovation, it was really largely about a couple of core technologies. One was just mechanical devices, so surgical devices and things. They got better. But the other, really, the main one was chemicals, if you will, pharmaceuticals. Before the 30s, what I think most people don't remember is drug companies largely sold things like laxatives, cold lozenges, quinine, and there really wasn't a pharmaceutical industry as we know it before World War II. It really became this an industry that grew out of the developments in advanced chemistry in the 30s and the 20s. And it really wasn't until the war that there were really any laboratories opened up to do pharmaceutical research. The Beecham Research Laboratory was the first one, opened in 1943. But as a result of this shift to essentially science-based pharmaceutical industry, away from kind of going out in the forest and getting some quinine, we developed a whole new industry, and we developed a whole new set of therapeutics really based on chemical-based drugs. And in the 50s, a host of new drugs emerged. And in fact, by 1956, 80% of the prescription drugs that were used were just simply unknown in 1941. Now that sort of fast forward another 30 or 40 years, or 50 years, you get to the late 80s and the early 90s when this new revolution starts to emerge. And it's a revolution really based on two fundamental core technologies. One, biotechnology and biologics, but the other is really IT. And I think people miss the IT part. Whenever we talk about healthcare innovation, everybody sort of thinks about biotechnology and companies like Genentech. Those are critical to where we are, but the IT portion is also critical. So if you think about the fact that much of what is going on today is in IT is not just about patient health records, and that's all very important, but it's about how IT can be used to make better decisions and improve care. And Dr. Epstein will talk about that in a minute, but in terms of personalized medicine, if you think about what is personalized medicine, it's basically the fact that we all have different genomes, we all have different genes in our body, and if we have certain differences between that. Now, I'm going to immediately get deep beyond my medical capability because I'm a doctor, but not that kind of doctor. But in any case, you have these genes, and genes are essentially pieces of information. And once we can track that information, then we can provide medical care in a much better way. So today, about 10 years ago, it cost $3 billion to do a full, complete genomic analysis of somebody. Today, it's less than $1,000, and I think in short time it'll be much, much less. There are actually a company that's doing it for less than $500 for partial of that. And so you get companies like Life Technology, which is developing these new technologies. Why are those companies able to do this? Largely because of what you call Moore's Law in the computer industry being applied to all of these new medical diagnostic equipment technologies that enable this. The second thing that's happening, I think that's critical, is what some people have called rapid learning networks. We did an event last year with my colleague Daniel Castro, moderated with the head of the NIH called Cancer Bioinformatics Group. And what they're doing is using information technology to bring together a wide array of information about diseases and how they interact. And at least in the cancer big example, they've been able to get real breakthroughs in, for example, in developing and in treating rare childhood cancers because of the ability to bring information together. So what we're really moving to is personalized medicine. I don't know how many people ever use Pandora on the web. You have personalized music. It's essentially the same thing. It's using information to know something about what you are or what you want, and then giving you that. That's really what personalized medicine is all about. And finally, I think a thing that people miss a lot, but I think is a key portion of what Medco provides about value added, is using IT to increase accountability. We were just having a conversation about a couple of experiences, my own personally, and then a colleague, which you'll share, really frankly, in my view, atrocious medical care. And doctors do their best, and some are good and some are bad. And what IT enables is to really be able to identify who's a good performer, what hospitals are good performers, what hospitals are not, what doctors are good performers. We did an event yesterday with Anish Chopra, the president's CTO, and he talked about a new application, this open source data application that they've developed, or they put out there, to put the data out there, and now you can actually go on a cell phone, or when you do, if you go on Bing, for example, the Microsoft search engine, and you search for hospitals, in the search results will give you the hospital quality rating. So these are powerful new technologies to improve patient quality. As I said, Medco is really, I think, in a unique place in this because of their ability not just to provide these services, but to have a really broad view on that. So, Rob, I want to talk about I want to start off by talking about personalized medicine and pharmacogenomics, the idea of taking sort of two things, information about yourself, and then really realizing that drugs have different effects on different people. And maybe you could just start with the example you shared with me earlier today about the colleague that you had with the wife condition.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And I've found this field so fascinating over the last 10 years and have tracked all of the great progress we've made. And it came home to me recently. A year and a half ago, I was at a meeting bigger than this one, but with important people like those in the audience today. And one of the people who was there, this was a group of people who run high-risk pool plans for different states for people who are very ill, that are state-funded health care for those people. Anyway, this person came up to me and said, I have a personal question. My wife has metastatic lung cancer. It's in her bones. Anything you would recommend? And I said, well, I'll have to go home and do some research, which I did do. And one of the things I found was that one of the new personalized therapies works particularly well on women with lung cancer who never smoked. If you never smoked, there's a gene called EGFR that usually is what fires up the tumor. So I just shot him back an email and I said, does your wife smoke? He said, no, she never smoked. I go, oh, well, just make sure to find out what her status is on the EGFR. There is a pill available for people like that. Anyway, I didn't hear a word. A year went by, I'm back at another one of those meetings, and I'm like, oh, I don't even want to know. And he comes up to me and says, the most amazing thing happened. And I said, what's that? Well, we went to the oncologist, And I said, you know, to the oncologist, what about this gene test, this EGFR test? And the oncologist said, oh, we didn't do that yet, or didn't do it, period. So he said, well, you know, I really want my wife to have that test done. So he had the test done, and it was positive. And flash forward a year, she was put on a pill that shuts off the gene, and her cancer's gone, and they just had come back from Hong Kong on vacation. So for me, it was a shocker. You know, like I knew a lot about it anyway, but I hadn't had a rub right up against an upfront personal experience like that. It's not for everybody, it's not for every drug, but in many situations today, and not only tomorrow, I mean today, people can be helped even more than they could have been. And I don't blame the provider community. I think it is what you touched on earlier. Science is developing so fast, and we're learning so much. And I was trained in the 70s. You know, I don't remember having much genetic background information up here. I would be hard pressed to keep up with all of this. And I think we need our information technology systems to further develop to toggle people, to give them checklists like you have as a pilot in an airplane. You know, you can't remember everything. Intuition isn't enough anymore. You have to have the latest information flash in front of you and provide you those tickler files to go, oh yeah, I should have learned that test.
Right. You wrote a peer-reviewed, or a co-author of a peer-reviewed journal article on blood clotting treatment, and fairly, really to me, significant differences between the treatment levels and the genetics on that. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. A very common drug, let me ask in the audience, how many of you know people who've ever been on Coumadin or Warfarin? Does that ring a bell? Come on, don't be afraid. Okay. How many know anybody who had trouble with that? A few of you, yeah, well, it's almost the same people. That's the problem with that drug. It's the same drug as rat poison. It's been on the market for 50 years, and there's no other drug on the market like it, though, for blood thinning. So if you're a person who has a funky heart rhythm, or you might flick off a little blood clot and cause a stroke, or if you've had a blood clot in your calf, you really need to be on warfarin. There are about 2 million people a year that are put on the drug, and it's very effective at thinning out your blood. The problem is, all of our requirements for warfarin, the people in this room, are different. I might need a different dose than you, and you, and you. And the drug is so sensitive that if you get it wrong by a milligram or two, someone can have a bleed or a clot. And sidebar piece, I was talking to a guy at the American College of Cardiology, a cardiologist who'd been practicing for 50 years. He goes, oh, Rob, don't even talk to me about this genetic thing. You know what we used to do to dose people? I go, what? He goes, we used to just up the dose until people bled. And then we backed it down. I'm like, oh, God. At least we're in a better place than that today. But anyway, what we've learned over the last 10 years is that there are 2 genes that really explain a lot of the variation between us and our dosing. One of the genes is responsible for the way we break it down in our liver. So if I'm a really fast metabolizer, I need more. If I'm a really slow metabolizer, I need less. And then the other gene codes for, or it explains the target of warfarin, which is vitamin K, the clotting factor. And if you don't make a lot of it, you don't need a lot of drug. And if you make a lot of it, you need more drug. So take those 2 genes together, it explains about 35% of the dosage requirements. And take all the clinical factors together, like age and gender and all that stuff, it's only 20%. So this gene test is really valuable. What no one had really done before our study that you referenced was to figure out that's all great. It seems to predict dose really well in the journal papers and everything else. But if you looked at people who did or didn't get the test, was there a difference on the side effect of bleeding and clotting and winding up in the hospital? And that's the study that we did and published in the American Journal of Cardiology just last month, where we found that amongst about 1,000 patients who got the test, they were at about a 30% lower risk of a hospitalization versus the people who never got the gene test. So it's useful. Not only does it predict, but it actually does work.
I think you said earlier that there was a fairly large number of drugs, something like 30%, that have the potential to where this kind of personalized medicine would make a difference. Is that?
Yeah, that's about right. We partnered up with the FDA a couple of years ago. They had went through all the product labels to find out where they'd already had something in there about this topic, you know, to warn doctors or patients. It doesn't have to be like a requirement, there's just something in there. And they gave us the list of those drugs, and then where I work, we cover 60 million people. So we looked at our database to see in a calendar year who's taken those drugs. And it turned out 25% of people are taking a drug where there's already something in the label about pharmacogenomics. But my guess is the world doesn't really know that.
Could you tell us all those drugs now?
So that quiz?
No, it's all we want to know.
Oh, okay.
Why are you like to know this question? So where do you see the future going? And then I want to move on to a couple other areas.
Sure.
But where do you see the future going in this? Is it a question more of understanding more of the different genes and their impacts? Is it a question of understanding the drugs better? How does that interaction work out? How are we progressing on that? Where do you see it maybe in 5 years?
Well, firstly, I think it's not just a future-oriented conversation. It's here today. Cancer care today is all personalized. So in 2006, for the very first year ever, sales for these kinds of targeted drugs with a test exceeded sales for chemotherapy or hormone therapy. So this century is about targeted medicine and cancer. It's not just about chemo anymore. Because chemo was blunt. Just kill every fast-growing cell, lose your hair, lose your stomach, and it may or may not get all the cells. Targeted therapies go right to the source, like that EGFR lung cancer story I told you about. So as we look at the pipeline of drugs coming to the market over the next 5 years, there's many, many, many of them, just like what I was describing, for very different diseases: cardiology, immunology, rheumatology, as well as cancer. 70% of cancer drugs in the pipeline are coming with a marker or some predictive target. I think we're going to keep seeing more and more of these things. We will get to a tipping point when people understand and learn this field, and I'm hoping IT can help us there. But we're not there yet, so it's still knowledge that's maybe out there but not being incorporated. What I see in the technology field, though, you mentioned life technologies earlier, they and others are coming out with what's called whole genome scanning, where you look at your entire 3 billion little base pairs, like from 8th grade in my 8th grade science. And the advantage of that is, if you're like a cancer patient and you've run out of things to do, you can get your whole genome of your cancer looked at, all the things in your cancer. And you might find another target or two to go try a different therapy. I heard a case in Arizona where a person had brain cancer and they were done. There was nothing left for them. And they had their whole genome scanned. And they found a marker that looked like a testicular cancer, which really didn't make sense, but they gave them the drug for that, and the person's cancer went away. So, I'm not advocating for it, but I'm just saying that kind of technology is coming in the next 5 years. So today it's like one gene, one drug, that kind of stuff. Tomorrow it's going to be, and how do we house this information and deal with it? But tomorrow it's going to be 3 billion pieces of information about you, and then picking through all that to figure out what you do.
Right. Yeah, I want to come back to that a little bit about sort of how do we move more towards that world, and what are some of the policy issues with that. But before I do that, a lot of what the healthcare reform, a lot, but certainly some of it was talking about comparative effectiveness research. How do you try to do that at Medco? How do you see that evolving, and what's the role, of, at least particularly on the pharmaceutical side, on the prescription side, in terms of playing a role there?
Well, let me say, I think comparative effectiveness research is really cool. I think it's great. Maybe one of the glass half full guys, but I think it's really wonderful for the following reason. Most medical research is done in the efficacy environment. So that's clinical trial, controlled setting, people who have a ton of inclusion and exclusion criteria, so they don't look like you or me. Studies that are conducted in academic practices where they really get tight control and all that good stuff. But that doesn't reflect the real world. So for example, this is a great example to me. In epidemiology, we wondered for years, does lowering cholesterol save lives? Like, people had done studies up until 1995, and get this one, where all the epidemiology studies showed that if people with the lowest cholesterol, did fine, but if you looked at all-cause mortality, you found more suicides and homicides in people with low cholesterol, which is like, go away from French fries, you're going to kill yourself or somebody. But what nobody really knew at the end of the day was there's something funky about too low of cholesterol. And finally, in 1994, the first ever large randomized trial, efficacy, not comparative effectiveness, showed at the end of 5.2 years that lowering cholesterol versus placebo reduced all-cause mortality, any reasons. No more that homicide and suicide story. But if you really dig into that data, 92% of people were still on therapy at the end of 5.2 years. So if you look at our data on 60 million lives, 50% of people drop off in the first year of therapy. And by 5 years, fewer than 30% of people are still on therapy. So that benefit in mortality and hospitalization, all the good stuff you see in the efficacy world, does not translate into the real world. So that's the first point. The second point is most of the research that we do is placebo-controlled. We're comparing against placebo. I don't know about you in this audience, but not so many of us are taking placebo. We're taking a different therapy. We may be taking, like in France, when they're looking at prostate drugs, one of the main therapies that the government pays for is saw palmetto, and they actually pay for that. So the comparative study needs to be against what they're currently doing in the environment. And so where we work, we have longitudinal, long-term data on people and all the drugs they take, and they could be living in Iowa or Hawaii or wherever. Academic specialty or community doctor. We can see how people actually use their drugs. We can see different things that people take for the same disease, and we can track and see how many have heart attacks and strokes and stuff. So I think it's going to be really valuable to us to better understand two things. One is, how do these things really work in the real world? And then secondly, because it's my interest in personalized medicine, what subpopulations benefit the most, which ones don't? Because when comparative effectiveness, you tend to enroll broad populations like people in this room, where we can narrow in and say, so people with a certain ethnic background that are doing better or worse, or a certain age group where it works better or not. And you can't do that in large clinical trials because they've zeroed in on a particular type of person. So I think we're going to move in a lot of cool information that we can use to make more decisions about what's right for whom. And wish that it had come along sooner.
I would just encourage people who are in the back there, please come on over. Don't mind if you walk in front or whatever. There's lots of seats here, and there are going to be other folks coming. So
It's two at the front. Don't be afraid.
there's one here.
I won't call you, or maybe I
Maybe a
will.
really long panel. We'll be here forever.
Yeah.
Standing. In the whole, there was a, I think as you alluded to, one of the problems with clinical trials is we do it in a very limited way. We don't obviously have long-term results.
That's true.
Drug out. How do you see us sort of building this system, if you will, where what a colleague of ours, Lynn Etheridge, and other people call rapid learning networks. So you're taking basically millions and millions of pieces of data and putting it together in a way that makes sense, so you can then see what things are actually. You're trying to do that. What are some other ways that you're beginning to get there as a society?
Well, that's a great question. So when drugs hit the market, they're usually tested on maybe 5,000 patients or 3,000 total. So if there's a bad safety issue that occurs in fewer than 1 per 1,000, you'd never know it. And that's why, and 1 per 1,000 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot, right? So the only way to learn about that is to study large numbers. And for rare events, really large numbers. So great question. I think the FDA a couple years ago put out what's called a Sentinel event, or Sentinel initiative on RFP. And there's a lot of people who are now playing in that. The idea was to assemble data on 100 million lives. I think it's mandated that way, actually, by next summer. And have people be able to roll up this kind of information and look for signals of safety or lack of efficacy. I think that's a great start, but we're going to need to do more of it. Those of us who house this kind of longitudinal data need to figure out how do we agree on a priority question to look at, and then how do we share, the data or the information in a way that's protecting patients' personal health information.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the privacy question because I'm speaking at a panel here, I think in this room, on Facebook, and everybody was freaked out on Facebook privacy, so they must be inappropriately in my view.
I don't know. I just got one this morning from this girl I knew in first grade. Now,
That's a good thing.
I don't know. Like 50 years later, do I really need to have a conversation with you now?
You can defriend me.
Look, oh, okay. Can I? I don't know. Show me how to do it.
Well, that's my son.
Okay.
The third area I want to talk about, which is related to this, is accountability. So I think 2 years ago, we did a house staff trip, and we visited Philadelphia. We went to Medco, and it was a very cool visit. If you haven't, I don't know if you're public or not, but their factory floor, if you will, to me, really unbelievable. They have these pallets, essentially, but guinea big, and there's a drug bottle, and there's 50 drug bottles, and they're all different. So mine might be here, yours is there, and and they go down this assembly line super fast, and they put exactly the right drug and the right dose and the right amount, and actually much higher accuracy rates than some guy who's at a pharmacy and was out drinking the night before. But it's actually more accurate. No, I can't say that, but it is more accurate. Anyway, the other thing, though, is you had these groups of people who evaluate how doctors are doing on prescribing. And I guess I was sworn to secrecy. I can't say what city was the worst in the country, but there is a city that is the worst in the country where doctors make more mistakes. It's sort of this 80-20 rule. Maybe it's not quite that, but there are just a few doctors who are, essentially doing a poor job of prescribing. They won't do drug interactions the right way. They won't do doses the right way. And you can do that. And I guess my understanding is you actually call up doctors and give them this information, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think it's important for people, that's a great question. I think it's important for people to realize that our country is one of the only countries in the world that is 100% wired at the pharmacy level. At least that's the one part of our healthcare system that is electronic and is wired. And that is amazing if you think about it, because if you go to, Hawaii today and get a prescription, fly home to New York tomorrow and get a different one, we're going to know those two, and if those two are not right for you, within nanoseconds, the message comes across the screen on the pharmacist level or the e-prescribing device if the doctor's using it. That's not true elsewhere. And several years ago, we were approached by the Swedish government. Their number 3 reason for ER visits was drug-drug interactions. And they said, we like what you guys got in the US. Help us wire up our world and put those levels of rule set on the information infrastructure. And that's what we did, actually. And now they're wired. And other countries are looking at it. But we're ahead of the US. And that came from over 90 legislation here in Washington that really opened the door for wiring pharmacy. And I think that accountability can come when you can't manage if you don't measure or look at it. And being able now to look at everybody's prescribing behavior against some metrics that people would agree are the right metrics allows us to engage with physicians and providers or members too on compliance, persistency, drug interactions, those things. And we've automated all of those things now. So our pharmacists can just look, patient X, 3 things, gotta get a phone call the doctor, remember, or whatever. But we couldn't do any of that if we weren't wired in a real-time environment.
Right. No, in so many of these areas, it's really kind of, in some ways, it's relatively straightforward. You have to have data in a digitized format.
Yeah.
You have to be able to
single format.
Pardon me?
A single format.
Well, that's true. In digitized single format, you have to be able to transmit it, and you have to be able to analyze it, which is all software analytics that you've developed, and others certainly. And then you have to be able to act on it. And that really, in many ways, was very hard to do even a decade ago. And now it's much, much easier, partly because of legislation. So I want to come back to legislation in a few minutes, but I want to ask you a little bit about sort of a lot of this. I think people think is futuristic, and your point is that it's not futuristic, it's here today. But there are some things that are really amazing, that are their potential. And one is both stem cell, and the other is regenerative research. I remember when I was first an old job, I was head of the Rhode Island Economic Policy Council back in the 90s, and one of the technology areas we targeted was tissue engineering. It was actually, for some strange reason, we had 12% of the tissue engineering research in the country for a state that had 1% of the GDP. So we actually had a lot of it, and I remember people talking about it back then, but it's taken 13, 15 years to get now to just beginning to be able to do that. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of where the potential is for those kinds of things?
I just think I'm amazed to tell you personally. Let's start with regeneration if we could. So there are about 120,000 people on a waiting list for organ transplant in this country, and people are dying every minute because they can't get an organ transplant. And even if you get the organ transplanted, now you're facing a life of anti-rejection medication, so you don't reject the organ with all the side effects. So to your point, what we've learned over the last, especially 10 years, and this really sounds like science fiction, but I kid you not, there are now companies that are today regrowing your own organs outside your body for 32 different organs in the body.
I saw that movie.
Exactly. All the things hanging. Yeah. But that's happening. They're all the way up to and starting phase 3. So this is happening faster than you can imagine. I'll give you one quick example. One company I met, they've developed technology to regrow your bladder outside your body. And they were telling me the story about this one kid who was born with spina bifida, which is a spinal problem that causes you to not be able to control your urine in your bladder. And this kid had to do self-catheterization, like to go to the bathroom every 2 hours. And he wanted to go to Harvard, but that was not going to happen if that was his life. So he apparently agreed to try this technology. And what they do is they take a few cells out of your bladder, they grow it over a disposable protein mold. It takes 30 days, and you're like this little weird freaky thing in lab growing. It's your bladder regrowing. And then they do an operation. They take yours out and put the other one in. Kid has normal bladder usage now. He's now at Harvard as an undergraduate student. So, that stuff's really right around the corner. You don't have to take anti-rejection drugs. You don't have to, a lot of bladder cancer people, they reform your colon and make a new bladder, but it's never, quite the same. All that stuff will go away. So it's curative. It's not just maintenance, it's curative, which is really exciting. And in terms of stem cells, so stem cells, another area that's around the corner. Stem cells are little baby cells that don't know what they want to be when they grow up. They're like, do I want to be a brain or a hair or a fingernail, or what do I really want to be? They don't know. And all the controversy around stem cell, of course, is where you get them from. And there was the whole thing in the last administration about fertilized eggs and blah, blah, blah. But we figured out now how to get stem cells from your skin, your own skin. So you don't have to go, all that stuff can go away because we can harvest them elsewhere. And there's starting to be, again, another drumbeat of interesting stuff. So in the Journal of the AMA a couple years ago, there was a paper out of Brazil. And they took, don't quote me, 16 to 20-ish, newly diagnosed insulin-taking diabetics. These are people whose blood sugar is like 500, normal's like 100. So they're sick people who need insulin. And they put them in the hospital, they harvested their stem cells, they kind of boosted them up a little bit, these little cells that don't know what they want to be, and then they re-injected them right into the pancreas. And all but 2 of the patients, over a 2-year follow-up period, are completely cured. They don't even need insulin. Is that crazy? So there are clinical trials in this country in heart failure, looking at exactly that, and some of the early findings look really good. I saw some data out of Ecuador for spinal cord injury. And these are people who maybe had a spinal cord injury, been in a wheelchair for 20 years. And they do an operation, they drop the stem cells where the injury happened, and things kind of regrow. And they don't get perfect function, but from what I've seen on YouTube, they're able to get up a little bit, and that makes a huge difference for people, in the quality of life. So I think some of these new technologies, yes, they're going to be expensive. In some cases, though, curative, so you don't have to go on paying for things forever. And they're really upending, the beliefs that I had as a medical student, where things, this is incurable, nerves don't regrow, oh, metastatic cancer, you're dead. All these kinds of things that we used to believe are getting upended by the new science. It's really exciting.
We did an event a number of years ago with Dr. Bill Hazeltine, who was a pioneer in this. And he said, at some point in the future, when someone asks you how old you are, you'll go, well, my body's 55, and my liver's 4, and my heart is 3. That's I got to go to the body shop for retread tires and a new pancreas. So let's talk a little bit about the implications of all of this. I think in many ways there's this, to me, disturbing view in Washington that has emerged that somehow medical innovation is something that is a problem. It raises costs, and hey, we're all about controlling costs, and we can't really afford innovation. And I think partly that's a result of the debate being partly a debate about price as opposed to what economists say a debate about cost. The difference being your healthcare costs are how much they are in GDP. The price is how much the government is paying. So you have doctors make less, the government price goes down, but the overall cost doesn't. So really, it seems to me what we ought to be thinking about on that is the question of cost, how do we drive these things. And then secondly, we need to be distinguishing between costs that add little value. So a lot of these studies that show that if you're in one city and you have a heart attack, the treatment costs are much higher than another city, things like that. And those would be inefficiency costs. You want to drive everybody down to the best treatment at the lowest cost. Yeah. But then there are costs that add real value. I mean, if I'm somebody with a spinal cord injury and I have to pay $100,000 so I can walk, that's real value. And as cancer drugs as well. So I guess my question would be, what do you see as the implication? Obviously, very hard and broad question, but just generally, how do you see a lot of these sort of next wave innovations? Partly all of them, we talk about comparative effective research, personalized medicine, these new kinds of things we just talked about, affecting the cost issue, just pure cost issue.
Yeah. Well, let me first say, I think we can't afford not to fuel innovation because we're not going to be able to control cost if we don't employ new technology to roll back costs. If you look outside the U.S., where cost control in healthcare has been a nation by nation way of managing costs, I mean, they set prices on stuff. Their inflation rates are going up about as fast or faster than we are now. So they've run out of, that game goes so far, unit cost control.
You only pay your doctor so little.
You only pay your doctor so little, and at some point, now where do you go? So we need to change the natural history of disease. We have to change the inevitable, X percent of people with diabetes get kidney failure, and Y% get heart failure, blah, 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 blah. Those life courses have to go away. We have to figure out how to take the technology and interrupt that life. So we don't pay off for all these costs and implications, but be mindful that whatever we're paying for has an ROI. So we have to be a little smarter about what we do. I can remember 20 years ago when I was in medical research, anything innovative, different mechanism of action, everyone thought, ooh, it's a different mechanism, new blood pressure pill, it works differently. Yeah, but does it lower the blood pressure more? No, but it's new and it's different, so we should pay more for it. That doesn't work anymore. So in this new world of comparative effectiveness, new alone doesn't value anything. It's new plus it's got to do something better. My feeling is a lot of people get that in the private sector. They're finally getting the point. Me Too's aren't cutting it. Me Too's are good in the sense that they stimulate competition. If you're all alone in a class or something, you can charge what you want. If 5 people are there, you're not going to come down. But you're not going to get a higher price because you're a Me Too. So I think a lot of people are getting the point that we have to really be serious about killing some things that aren't going to really matter and advancing other things that really do matter. And I'm a glass half full guy, so I have huge hope. The real issue, Rob, I find, is that we have a hard time in this country sunsetting things. So if you look back over the last 20, 30 years, look at all these papers people published on what's the economic implication of new technology to cost. What we find is some people adopt the new, people don't drop the old, and we do add more cost to the system. We have to figure out a way to say, okay, this is new, we got to stop doing this other stuff. Yeah. And that's the problem.
Yeah. Now, it's maybe already happening, but maybe it's not. Would it be worth having a national strategy to just say, all right, let's look at the 10 most costly things, which are usually the end of life, but leaving those aside as a whole. Do we want to talk about death panels, by the way?
This audience is probably familiar with that time.
Leaving aside that part of it. Is it worth sort of thinking, look at the top 10 things? And the other thing, by the way, I think where we ignore, or we don't measure the cost, but we want to measure the full cost of society, including the ability of a person not just to consume healthcare later. It's almost in a way sort of CapEx versus OpEx. If you want high CapEx, maybe in low OpEx, you might be better off. And then at the same time, do you want to have the ability, you want to measure somebody, if they're out of a wheelchair, then they're more productive and they're adding more value to society. So is it worth going down that path?
I think we definitely. I know, the IOM met, a year ago or something, put out a document on the top 100 topics that would be good for comparative effectiveness research. I think there should be some more public-private engagement around that so we can get concurrence that these really are the most important things we need to find out about. And that would have a policy implication that could ratchet down some of this treatment variation you were talking about earlier. Because variation usually implies confusion, right? Like, so some people feel, treatment X is smarter, therefore in that region of the country they go for it. And in that region of the country, like, no, watchful waiting is fine for us. Right. So there's that kind of confusion can be best informed by doing some of these comparative studies. Right. But we need to engage a lot of stakeholders to figure out what is on that 100 list.
No, I think in that sense, it's sort of in some ways, a meta message needs to be, innovation is not the problem, it's the solution to these, not just about healthcare quality, but potentially cost.
I think so.
Let me add one related question, and then I want to jump into policy. There's and I sent Klobuchar, she'll be here in about 20 minutes or 25 minutes or so, and I know she talks about this, what other countries are doing to really, in a way, think about their medical regulatory system, and not just from a narrow health perspective, but from a competitiveness perspective. In other words, not that you would approve things that do it in a more dynamic way, you do it in a more efficient and fast way. You had an example when we talked earlier about one of the challenges with improving drugs, personalized medicine, is you improve two things now. You're improving the test, if you will, and the drug. Other countries seem to be maybe perhaps doing a better job. And then you mentioned the fact that Medco is providing services internationally now. So in a way, not in a way, you are an exporter. You're exporting high value-added services throughout the country, helping reduce our trade balance, create jobs. How do you see all this as a competitiveness issue? Our countries are in a chase, essentially, to move into this next wave of medicine and health provision, and is that something we're at risk of perhaps losing our advantage on if we don't change?
Well, I was at a meeting in the UK about a month ago, and a lot of great, smart-minded people were there from various countries, small, quiet, meeting to talk about just exactly kind of this topic. And what I found was fascinating was that some of the countries like China who were there were saying, we're going to build this whole thing from ground up. Like, all this new technology's out there. We're not going to worry about how we get these things approved. Let's take a whiteboard and decide, like in their case, should we just get a genetic test in every child, put it in a record somewhere, and every time anything happens to them, they've got it. So should we open some national laboratories, which perhaps we do. What is the right way, what's the right framework to have a whole country have the best health over the next 100 years, and how do we go there? In our country, I feel, and in some of the European countries, we're trying to adapt our 20th century infrastructure to 21st century science, and we're struggling mightily. We're trying to figure out incentives, trying to do different things, but it's harder, I think, to take all the new stuff and layer it on top of the old stuff, and it seems, at least from the outside, than to watch what they're doing, from ground up. And I am feeling like they're going to leapfrog. Some of these countries are going to leapfrog beyond what we're doing because we're fits and starts, having trouble kind of incorporating the new stuff. They're like, let's just start from scratch.
Right. No, you certainly get that sense in some other countries that they are less sort of worried about, is this going to work? Let's just go forward, let's innovate.
Correct.
Let's not look in the rear view mirror as much.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch over to policy for a few minutes. You mentioned we did a report that Daniel Castro took the lead on last year called Explaining International IT Application Leadership, and it looked at, one of the parts of that, one of the reports was on health IT. And so we looked around the world at what countries are leading in health IT, and what we found, it was the Scandinavian countries. It was the Netherlands, it was Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. But the one area, and they were leading in terms of the EHR, electronic health records. They're about 4 to 5 times more usage than we are. In fact, in some of these countries, if you go to a doctor and they don't have an EHR, you probably don't want to go to that doctor. The perception is that they can't be a very good doctor if they're not wired. And that's how far these countries have gone, and partly because they have national strategy. But the one area that we do well on, in fact, for example, better than Finland, which is having challenges, is on the wired pharmacy, if you will. And in part, or maybe a large part of that could be traced back to smart public policy. Do you want to tell us that story and how that works? And the role of Congress in making that happen?
Absolutely. So back in the 80s, or late 80s, I guess it was, there was a conversation around drug safety in this country. And the federal, I don't know, you all might know better than me, I'm not sure exactly who, but some folks in these buildings here in Washington said, we're not going to keep matching the Medicaid funds or helping Medicaid pay for prescription unless the pharmacies build in a system that will protect people from this drug-drug interaction. Because Medicaid in particular, people take a lot of drugs, there's a lot of interactions, a lot of hospitalizations are due to that problem. It's said, up to 20% of elderly hospitalizations are due to issues with drugs, even in our system as it is. So anyway, Congress in the Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 1990 said by January of 93, payment's going to go away unless you do this. And boom, that just stimulated a whole industry. The way, if the public sector puts rails on the highway, the private sector can innovate right underneath that. But we need the rails. And so those rails were put on the highway, and boom, the private sector just rose to the challenge. And within 2 years, everybody was wired. And single data set, single data elements. It's not like age in one database and month, day, year, years, and day, month, year in somebody else's. It's all the same. or how you call a drug and a code is the same in any pharmacy in America. So all that stuff got built in, which was awesome. We didn't do the same thing, for example, with EHRs and electronic prescribing. As you know, MIPA a few years ago, legislation, which many of you probably worked on, gave a carrot for 3 years for doctors to adopt electronic prescribing, where they got a little extra money if they did it, and now for the next 3 years after that, they get a little penalty. It's not the same thing, though. So we've gone from 50,000 prescribers to 150,000, which is great, but there's 850,000 people writing prescriptions. At Medco, we make 50,000 outbound calls a week just to read what the hell's on the prescription, because you can't read it. That would go away with electronic prescribing, and all the errors that come from that would go away. So, you know, I would just say I'm convinced that if the public sector puts the guide rails on the highway, like we did in pharmacy in this country, the private sector can innovate right underneath it and make it happen.
There's a one, I don't know how many people here are Curb Your Enthusiasm fans, but there's a wonderful episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David is dating a doctor, and the whole episode is a riff on the fact that nobody can read her handwriting.
You have to tell me during the break the punchline.
A great punchline, I can't say. So, I mean, I think the lesson there is that there's in a way, a public-private partnership, that it's not just simply about the government getting out of the way and leaving it to the market. The market in this place is not really a market. There's many market failures.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, it's about doing it in a way that isn't overly prescribing and is allowing you to what economists call creating platforms, essentially. Another thing with rail, a platform that then can innovate around the top of that, on top of that. I don't know how widely that view is understood in Washington. There tends to sort of, I think, oftentimes go a little on one side or the other and not quite get that sweet spot. We did there, and I don't know if it was just a question of luck when we got it. Sometimes luck makes, you just happen to throw the ball enough and it'll go in the
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, you know, the other thing about the wired system that I like in pharmacy is that now, because we are real-time wired, we can actually harness it for other things. So in this century, now that we've learned that maybe you need a genetic test to take a drug, we can know on Tuesday that you got a new prescription for whatever the drug is, and we can pick up the phone that day and call the doctor and say, did you know there was this genetic test? And would you like to order it? And here's the ins and outs and blah, blah, blah. If we weren't wired, we wouldn't be able to do that. So I think it helps position us for this new wave. Probably completely, I'm sure, not thought through in the beginning, but it's another unintended consequence that was a good one.
No, exactly. That is often what happens with platforms. You have all these amazing unintended consequences on top of them that you couldn't envision. Although it strikes me, when you hear you say you're picking up a 19th century technology to finish the conversation, and I'm wondering, you know, how far are we away, or if? I mean, it seems to me if you're in that situation, it could be a couple of things. It could be an email to the patient, as well as something that would go right to the doctor's handheld PDA or tablet computer that the doctor actually has, as opposed to phone call. Now, maybe the way healthcare works, that's not an effective communication, but maybe it is, or maybe you supplement it if you don't hear back with a response, yes, I got this. Obviously, the problem there is most doctors aren't wired in that sense, and we don't have a system for patients really to understand this. In Denmark, I think it was 90%, 85% Daniel, EHR?
Yeah, over 90.
Over 90% of Danish patients have their own personal health record on the internet. And it seems to me with this notion of if there's personalized medicine, if I'm taking a drug, and they know that the drugs are in it, you can imagine a system where, oh yeah, here we're going to pop up all the interesting research that's been done on that. And by the way, if your doctor hasn't given you this genetic test you might want to do, you can build that intelligence into a system like that. And I know we talked earlier about how do you get this movement going. It seems to me you get it going kind of on all fronts at the same time, partly through patient empowerment, partly through drug companies and other things. So maybe we can segue into that. You had talked a little bit also about that maybe we need to do more to incent pharmaceutical companies to be thinking about when they develop drugs, to develop them instead of, here's our one drug to develop, or here's 4 related ones, but there are obviously issues around that could maybe better incentives around that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Well, if you think about it from the pharmaceutical company perspective, If they're developing a drug and they think it might work against placebo, then they've calculated a market size for their drug and a price point and all that. If they have done some research and found that really only 40% of the people get the response, they've just cut their market in half. And that's not attractive. So it reminds me back to the 1990s. I'll finish in 2 seconds. In the 1990s, when pharmaceutical companies were not doing studies in pediatrics and children. And so what happened was a piece of legislation came through that said, you know what, we're going to change the patent law, where if you do pediatric studies, you can have an extra 6 months patent life. Suddenly, we had all these great studies in children, so we could protect children and know what dose is right for them. I would think in the world of personalized medicine, to incent drug companies to find out in whom does this work. Maybe the one way to around it, I'm not saying it's the way, but a way that may be useful is to relook at that kind of a incentive for them to give up part of their market and maybe have a little longer shelf life for their drug.
Great.
I'm going to stop. Because our real business.
Oh, yeah.
Well, as you can see, we've been joined by Senator Klobuchar, so really we want to welcome you. We've been having a great conversation. So I just wanted to introduce Senator Klobuchar, who most of you know, and then she'll make some remarks about this issue, and she's had a particular interest and passion about this. I was lucky enough to testify in Senate Commerce recently on the Senator Klobuchar subcommittee, and then the issue of how we do a better job of getting medical innovation was a key component of that hearing. Senator Klobuchar was elected in 2006, became the first woman elected to the state of Minnesota to the U.S. Senate. Prior to that, she was the first woman elected to serve as Hennepin County prosecutor, which was the big county really where Minneapolis and Twin Cities are, in 1998. She has had a long career as an attorney, and before that, she's been named by Working Mother magazine in 2008 as Best in Congress. American Prospect named her a woman to watch. And the Washington Post named her a rising star and also the funniest new member of Congress.
And I name myself as late.
Well, I have to say the bar is pretty low on the funniest new member of Congress. She also serves on 5 Senate committees: Agriculture, Environment, Public Works, Commerce, Judiciary, and JDC. And she graduated magna cum laude from Yale University and University of Chicago Law School. And I also noted on her bio that her grandfather worked 1,500 feet underground in the iron ore mines in northern Minnesota. And a few years ago, I gave a speech in northern Minnesota near Hibbing, and part of the conference tours, you could go down one of these old mines, which we did. And I came up and I thought, thank God I never had to do that, because it was so unbelievably difficult. It looked like to have a job to do that. So. Stout background in your family for being able to do this. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, and it's just an honor to be here with Rob, with all the good work he's done with innovation, and Dr. Epstein as well. Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to interrupt just for a few minutes. I actually have to go back. I was laughing with Dan, who is a fellow in our office and doing the work, that I'm here to talk about it when I actually should be back doing it. And so, because we're trying to get the small business bill passed, and Senator Lemieux, the Republican from Florida, and I have an export piece of the small business bill that I didn't think we were going to get on, but we are, to help small and medium-sized businesses to export. And I truly believe in my heart that innovation and this idea of making things in our country again, or what Tom Friedman, who's a Minnesota native New York Times columnist, called nation building in our own nation, is the key to our success in getting out of this economic slump. And a lot of that is also exports, when 95% of the customers for medical products, as well as all products made in our country, 95% of the customers are outside of our borders right now. And we just haven't been quite keeping up with that market, and I think there's a lot to be gained there. So that's why I'm excited about that. Second thing I would mention before I get to the medical piece of this is that Rob did come and testify, and he had some great ideas. And then I went and did an event at the University of Minnesota at their nanotechnology lab, and they were saying the same things. And our staff, this is a true story, within a week, right, drafted up this bill with all of this, some focus on commercialization and making it easier for businesses, if they produce an idea at a university, to then take it to market by getting loans. I just found out the entire bill is going to be included in the American Competes Act, and it's passing today through the committee. So, Anyway, so that was a lot of fun. I had to write like Senator Rockefeller pleading notes about why it was so important to make the universities do a actual written report every year explaining what the research that they did, which sometimes is great basic research, but how it relates to commercialization. So we have a bunch of things in there that I'm really excited about. This topic, of course, interests me because, first of all, I do head up the subcommittee, which I named myself, Competitiveness, Innovation, and Export Promotion, and I've done a lot in that area. But the second reason is that my state, my home state of Minnesota, is really what has made our state great. We're the state that brought the world everything from the pacemaker to the Post-it note, right? We are the home of Medtronic, which started as a little company in a garage, 3M, which started as a sandpaper company up in Two Harbors, Minnesota, nearby where my grandpa and my dad worked in the mines, and Target, that started as a little dry goods store in Nicollet Mall. So we've always believed in moving forward in innovation, not to mention the Mayo Clinic, which was started by two brothers who decided to go into medical practice together. So we have always dreamed big in our state, and I think it's really, when you look at the story of our state, including the recent downturn and how we've come out of it, and I'm not saying we're out of it totally, but the unemployment rate in our state is now down to 6.8%, which is significantly below the national average, especially for a state that isn't just all oil or rural. In fact, we have no oil. It's a state that has a strong energy economy. We had a strong renewable electricity standard from the beginning. We've had 11% job growth in that area, and also the innovation piece of this. We're 7th in the country for Fortune 500 companies, but 21st in population. And obviously a lot of this has to do with medical innovation. And when I look at how our country moves ahead, I really focus on this idea of the innovation, nation building. And how do we do that? Well, for one thing, I think that the policies that we adopt in Washington have to be more focused in that area. What does that mean? Well, when students come to graduate from MIT or the University of Minnesota, and they get a graduate degree, and you know what we do? Unless they work out a whole deal and get a job right away, we send them packing. We basically put up a sign that says, "Do not apply. Go back to India, or go back to Morocco, or go back to wherever you came from." And guess where they're going to start the next Google? In India, or Morocco, or wherever they came from. So I think having a better immigration policy, allowing people to stay in this country, will help not just for medical innovation, but for all innovation. Making it easier with the visas, things like that. That is what made this country great, when we brought people in with expertise from all over the world. Second piece of it is a healthcare system that works, and obviously the medical innovation and the medical technology will be a big piece of that. We had a little different take on the healthcare debate in Minnesota. We're always held up as a shining example of how you can make things work. And my focus was different. My focus was on costs. And I thought if we could use the same delivery system that we have at Mayo in the rest of the country, we would be better off. And I know there's some debates about that. But I also know that there are some incredibly disorganized delivery systems across the country where people are running around with their x-rays, talk about medical technology, and going to, I don't want to say 20, but I'm sure they go to 10 different doctors with this x-ray that they keep in their hot car, and there's just no accountability, and no one knows what the other doctor said. And it leads to not only more medical error and death, but it also obviously leads to huge increased costs. There was one study in Dartmouth that showed that if hospitals around the country use the same kind of delivery system that Mayo uses, which is of course very technology-based because everything's on one technology system. By the way, it's not just Rochester, it's all their network across little tiny rural areas all over Minnesota. That we would save in the last 4 years of patients' lives who are chronically ill, $50 billion every 4 years. And that's with Mayo quality health care. Because the lack of organization and the lack of just use of technology in other parts of our country. So that is another thing that we need if we're going to move this country forward, because we cannot compete with companies in other countries that have more organized healthcare systems. If we don't get our act together on ours, we're just simply not going to be able to compete because too much of our profits and investments is eaten up by healthcare costs. Third thing is R&D tax credits, a policy that doesn't like a game of red light, green light like we've been doing in this country the last few years, so people know that their investments are going to pay off. And then, and I think the last thing is a competitiveness policy, which Rob has talked about, an innovation policy for this country. And actually, Senator Warner and I are introducing a bill today to be part of the America Competes Act to demand that we have such a policy in this country and that we study emerging industries and successful industries. So we look at what obstacles are in the way to good competition that way. So that's what I've been focusing on with innovation. I've done a lot in the area of medical technology. First, the FDA process has become somewhat of a problem right now with the medical device industry. It's taking way too long. And what's happening, because China requires country of origin approvals for devices, a lot of the money's moving over to Europe because they have a quicker, but I consider safe approval process. And so we're trying to get things, and there's some very good reasons they may do this, but they need to give people some time to find out what those new processes are, because right now there's someone calling for a study on day 89 of a 90-day approval period after someone invested $40 million. And so the investments, they've lost a third of the investment in medical device. Approvals are down 12% from 2009 to 2010, according to the Morgan Stanley report that came out last week. And I consider this an area where we have great potential for export. The information sharing, we always run into privacy issues, obviously. I worked a lot on that in terms of making sure that with technology that we're going to be able to share the kind of information that we need, because if we just say everything, we can't share it at all, and use some of the old ways of looking at things, we're not going to get to where we need to be with the technology. So those are just two things I bring to light that I've been working on. I know there's a lot of other things as well. So I know I have to go back because when you and Landrew and I are giving speeches on this export thing in small business, but maybe I can take one or two questions.
If you have a question, just raise your hand and please identify yourself. Yes, sir.
My name is Robert Bond. I work in the medical informatics field. And
Medical what?
medical informatics, so data.
Okay.
That's my
Kind of too fancy for me. Okay.
The question I have is around reimbursement, and we touched upon a couple of things. I have my notes here, just so I remember. Is sunsetting, so we keep things around because we can't get rid of them. We also talked about innovation. We also talked about diagnostics and pairing them with therapeutics. And the question I have is the reimbursement system we have, it disincentivizes certain things like diagnostics or primary care consulting services because they don't get paid. We get paid to do things, not so much to talk to people. And also medical students, they're incentivized to go into higher paying specialties versus primary care. And I wanted to hear your thoughts about changing our reimbursement system so it becomes more free market-esque.
Well, that was the whole healthcare bill. A lot of this was to focus more on trying to adjust, especially the Medicare reimbursements, because that really sets the tone for a lot of the reimbursements. My favorite story on that was not out of Minnesota. I think it was Intermountain or some other one of the healthcare systems having issues with diabetes, the way they were handling it. They decided, you know what, instead of everyone seeing a doctor, we're going to have them see an RN, and then the harder cases will go to a doctor. And they ended up saving tons of money, having higher quality patients happier, better results, and they just got completely screwed with the way the reimbursement system works. Well, why is that? Because we don't really reimburse based on quality or results. We reimburse based on, say, quantity of doctor's visits. And so I'm not going to be able to answer all your questions, plus I have to leave. But I will say one of the major keys here is to start looking at, I have a quality index that got included on the healthcare bill that I did with Maria Catwall and some other people that starts to use that as a factor in how you reimburse for medical care. Because right now it's just the number of visits to a doctor, and it doesn't account for, say, infections in hospitals and other things. So I think the best thing we did in this bill, well, there's a lot of things I'd like to work on in the future, clearly, but is that we started that process of looking at reimbursing based on quality of care. Because if we don't do that, we're never going to get to where we need to go. We're going to have people running around to 10 doctors with their x-rays. And I thought it was also the hardest thing to do. You know that Gawande wrote the article in the Atlantic Monthly that got a lot of attention on the healthcare delivery systems preparing costs in McClellan, Texas, El Paso, and Rochester, Minnesota. And there's just no explaining it. But in certain areas of reimbursements and the money they're getting is completely out of hand. So what this guy did is he then looked at it back in December. The Senate bill, and he said, it's a big bill, and it's got a lot of different incentives in place, but actually, we can't do a one-size-fits-all when we have this humongous healthcare system. We're going to have to look at different incentives and see what works, and he compared it to agriculture in the early part of the century, when the food part of our budget was 25%, and it went down to like 8% after the USDA put out a bunch of different incentives. They went around and said to farmers, hey, if you do your crop differently, if you rotate them, we'll give you a little money, we'll do this differently. And it literally made them start a culture shift. And that's what we need to do with healthcare. It's a long, broad answer to your question, but I do agree with you that reimbursements are key, and how we create incentives in the healthcare system is really messed up now, and that's what we started to change with this bill. And now I have to go. Okay, thank you.
So I want to thank Senator Klobuchar both for coming today and also for her real leadership on these issues of innovation and competitiveness. I think it's probably worth, let's maybe turn it over to other folks here. We've got a little more than 15 minutes left, so if you have a question, and if you want to, or Dr. Epstein, if you want to just identify yourself and raise your hand. In the back there, sir.
Steve Weitzman, Dr. Epstein. Is there sharing among the pharmacy benefit managers and the pharmacies of their data?
Not today. So, the question was, is there sharing of the data between pharmacy benefit managers and others of the actual raw data? And the answer is no. For the most part, most plans like Medco are concerned about protecting healthcare information, and so we would never really share encrypted information outside the company, since we're not allowed to really do that. But do we share research results or analyses? That's kind of the way that the Sentinel initiative was put together by the FDA. So in that scenario, as I mentioned earlier, we're wanting to look at up to 100 million lives worth of data by next summer, a year from now. And it's not that the 100 million lives worth of raw data is going into one data set. It's that a common protocol is being sent out to various stakeholders who have access to information. They'll do the analysis on the confidential data, roll it up into a report, and that'll be kind of like a meta-analysis across. So that seems to be a better way to go at the moment, to get disparate people to want to play nice in the sandbox. And I think it's going to be pretty effective, actually. There's another question back there.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Scared him away.
Hi, Richard Sanger. Given how advanced the electronic systems are for pharmacy, have there been thinking about, kind of building on the last question, but really letting pharmacy kind of be the arrow for a new kind of sentinel? So build around something that already is ubiquitous instead of having to build up so much new health IT infrastructure.
Oh, I love that question. You might be able to answer that too, but I'm probably biased, so I have to say that right up front. But from my perspective, drugs are 88% of the intervention people turn to. So 12% is diet or surgery or something else, but 88% of the time it is drugs. And that's wired already, to your point. So now the question would be, in my mind, just like yours, what needs to be wired next and hooked onto that system? And you can make the I could make the argument with you, it could be diagnostics. One thing informs the other. So for example, and this isn't wired, but for one client, we provided them, their members with diabetes, access to home diagnostic testing. Just no doctor order, put a little drop of blood on the film, and find out how you're doing. Now, a lot of people loved it because they don't have to go to the doctors or get a blood test and all that stuff. This was a hemoglobin A1C test, a fancy test to know how well you're doing. And what we learned was about 25% of it or so of the diabetics were out of control. And then when we married that up to the drug information, what we found was that 50% of the time, it's because they didn't take their pills every day. They didn't need a higher dose, and they didn't need a second drug. They needed to stay on their drug every day. But if you didn't wire those two things together, you'd never know. And if you were my patient, you came to me and I found an abnormal test, I'd say, oh dear, drug isn't working, better up the dose or give you another one. I don't have, access to looking and linking. So I like your idea. I'm there conceptually. I think, if one were to think that way, the question would be, what's the next part of healthcare that should be wired and hooked onto the already wired piece? And I don't know the answer to that. You might know the answer.
I guess just on that point, it seems to me we need a system where the doctor could have the ability to know all the drugs you're taking
Yes.
in real time electronically, which they don't now.
Mhm.
And then the question is, would that be an opt-in system, an opt-out system, a mandatory system? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, in a way, that was part of what the NIMA Act was about a few years ago, which had this carrot and stick to get doctors to wire up and be able to see that. And that's tripled the use of those devices by physicians, so that's great. And just a sidebar about some of the European flavor of wiring healthcare. You know, it's one thing to wire, it's another to be interactive. So in the UK, for example, they had a statute that said all doctors have to have electronic medical records. Well, that goes back about 25 years. And if you go to the UK and you see a physician, they don't take you right to an examining room. You sit in front of a desk with them and they're entering data into their computer. Problem is, it didn't interact with anything. So it's great that it's, you know, wired or electronic, but it's not pinging anything with you know, messages. And then they use their own homegrown codes called the Survey codes, which, you know, one of them, which I love, was if a plant scratched your eyeball, you know, you had a really sore eye from a plant, that got its own code. That's useful. But, so it needs to be wired, it needs to be interactive. And I think that the carrot and stick has been able to triple the use of the technology in physicians, but we've got to get the rest of the way there, you know, to give them access to that information, one way or another.
I want to go all the way to the back and then right here.
I'd like to follow up on that question a little bit, because it would seem that with your database that you can have that interactive information, because through the payer,
Yeah.
you get all of that information. Now, I don't. I use another company, one of your competitors,
Right.
because that's who my insurer uses. But they've got, in my case, a 29-year history with one insurer, that they should be able to have that. So the question really is, how can we take that data? What are the barriers or prospects for getting it into a health information exchange, so that there is that access? So if I'm in a car accident tonight and get taken to the ER, that they're going to know what my drug history is, and that information resides with the payer.
Yeah, well, your point is well taken. The good thing about the pharmacy system that we have in this country is that somebody has your complete record every time you fill something, and it's a real time, up to date, and live. And the people who access it today are you, potentially through the web. You may go on the web and look at your stuff or print it down. Your pharmacist would have access to it in real time, real live time, and if your physician were wired, he or she would also have access to that information. How it gets to hospitals and other healthcare systems today, there aren't the pipes. So, you know, in this country, we don't have the pipes. So the hospitals don't communicate with the wired pharmacy outpatient system. So there's no electronic way for that to work today. There would have to be some incentive mechanism, something, to allow for the 5,000 or 6,000 hospitals in America to interact with that network. It just doesn't happen today. It doesn't exist.
I mean, one thing that we've talked a fair amount about and been an advocate of are what has been a proposal. In fact, there was a proposal in Congress for this National Health Record Data Bank idea. And the idea there would be that there would be these trusted third parties. It could be Google or Microsoft, or it could be AARP, or it could be Medco, or it could be anybody who decides they want to be that trusted party for you. You then would have an account with them, and it would place where all the data would be aggregated. It would be your data. Now, it wouldn't take the data from Medco. You'd still have the data. But then if you wanted to open that up and let a hospital see it, or a doctor see it, or, you know, have various, we saw a demo on one that was very interesting. You had various protocols. You know, I'm going to let this doctor see it for 1 month because my mother-in-law is going to be in Florida for a month, but then after that they can't see it because the mother-in-law comes back to Chicago or whatever. But I'm going to let her see this, the doctor see this part, but not all that part. So there's some patient empowerment there as well. I mean, what's your thought on something like that?
I think that's great. That's sort of part of the personal health record movement. It's wonderful, particularly in cancer care. I recently met with an oncologist who was reminding me that cancer patients see, on average, 6 doctors, 6 different doctors. And because we're in a clunky paper-based world, her advice was, and if you're newly diagnosed, get a big notebook and go get copies of every lab and every x-ray and everything and put it in there and take it with you to all your doctor appointments. Otherwise, you're going to repeat the test 3 times waste time while they're tracking stuff down. It'd be far better if that was just sitting in an electronic file. You go touch the button, have it on your screen. I think it's a great idea. In Germany, they're experimenting with a card, like a credit card, where there's a computer chip in it. And you just swipe it wherever you go, and it just keeps uploading your information. And then if you were in the ER, you just give them your card, and it's there. And if you lose it, it gets inactivated, and you can get another card with your stuff on.
Right. Yeah, we're actually doing a study now that Daniel's taking lead on digital signatures and digital IDs, and so France is another country that's using smart cards with biometrics.
Yeah.
Right here.
Yeah. Sorry, we were talking about all the great benefits about all this interoperability and being able to share information. And I was wondering if you could just touch a little bit on the privacy and security issues associated with that.
Yeah.
How that's almost prohibiting people from sharing information. And there's been some fear and some, and some discussion about how the lack of privacy and the lack of security will inhibit people from sharing this information.
Yeah, that's a big question. Certainly the last 10 or 12 years since the HIPAA legislation has led to a lot of conversations and I wouldn't say obstacles, but a lot of thinking and slowing down of sharing of information, quite frankly. But you know what I found where we were, I don't think consumers are as obsessed about it as, those of us who work in healthcare think. We've even asked, we've done studies with thousands of patients to ask if they want to have a genetic test. Now, we're low genetics, that's going to scare people. Fewer than 3% of people say, yeah, no, thanks. 97% are like, give me the test, I don't care, and I'll share it with whoever you think I should share it with. So it's been my observation, at least where I work, the kinds of work that we do over the years, that consumers seem less bothered or less concerned if they're in need of a healthcare issue, they're willing to share whatever they need to share to get themselves in good shape. But certainly, those of us who are working in the field of trying to share information have more hurdles than we used to have, 10 or 20 years ago. We have to be mindful of those things. One bad apple will spoil the whole party, so to speak.
Yeah, we did an event last summer, I believe. There was a study by two economists, one was an economist, one was a health policy researcher at, I think it was MIT and Virginia, University of Virginia. And what they did is they found through econometric methods that states with overly strict privacy laws actually had less health information sharing, and that actually had demonstrable negative health outcomes.
That's interesting.
And so what you want to try to do, at least in our view, is you want to find that sweet spot that enables information to be shared, but at the same time gives people some level of security and comfort. Although I'm sort of with you in a way, I met with the Dutch health information minister a while back, last year I guess, and in the Netherlands you can opt out of the system, and 2% of people opt out.
There you go.
If they want the information to be able to get to the people who can get it. Phil, did you have a question?
Yeah, Philip Weber, Congressional Budget Office. So you went, because of OBRA, the pharmaceutical people went and put all their medical records in a common format, you said. How hard was that? So how hard would it be when the next increment, the diagnostic people go to do it? How hard will it be for those people to put everything so that the terminals all look the same, everything is the same?
Hard. In a word, for prescriptions, people had to come up with a common format that they all agreed to. You know how this works. Which coding scheme do you call, furosemide 10 milligrams? What's the code for that? Do we all agree that it's the same code? How do we put in days supply? How's that calculated? All the little fields that are there had to be agreed upon and kind of ratified between the whole pharmacy community. You'd have to do the same thing, let's say it's lab. You'd have to get the lab community together and say, we're going to codify everything, including the values, in a common format that we've all agreed to. And the added level of, complexity is reference ranges. So in laboratories, depending upon who did the test with which machine, the reference range for the result could vary, if you follow my drift. So, blood sugar in one machine, normal range could be different than a blood sugar in another machine. That's a little trickier than just drug, where it's dosage strength or whatever. But not impossible. So it starts with getting a common language, and then the next piece is how looking at the system of where labs happen and figuring out how do all those things get wired. So in pharmacy, there's 60,000 pharmacies, bricks and mortar facilities. Where people go get their bloods drawn, can be in a doctor's office, can be in a standalone office parked somewhere, could be an outpatient hospital. So you have to kind of think about how do we enforce or figure out a way that all these different settings would have ping in a real-time environment. Not impossible, but hard. It's not going to be easy.
I mean, these are largely organizational challenges.
Yeah.